Now, it's very, very difficult to understand families. We all know that. You've done this work before. Families are, despite their really wonderful experiences, they can be really tough places too. They involve lots of people and complicated organizational structures, and it can be very, very hard to negotiate and maneuver your way through that. So from an FFT perspective, we tried to bring some things to the table to help you with that. Primarily, we're going to bring, as you go through the training program, we're going to bring you three large things. First, as you can see at the top here, the picture of the young man looking at the world through dandelions. You're going to hear me talk about the lens of FFT a number of times through this training program, but it is central. How you look at families, how you understand families is going to become a primary and maybe even core and foundational element in being successful. If you can look at the space between them rather than just what's inside them, you're going to develop a way to have more effective interventions and more different kinds of interventions. Secondly, we're going to bring a map to you. You know, any journey is better guided by a map than it is just guessing. And so the journey that FFT is going to bring is a 3-phase model where you're going to develop the core foundation of what it's going to take for the family to help themselves and help each other. A next step which builds skills, and a next step which helps them use those skills in different settings. It's a map, and it's a map that you use with every single family. But like with all maps, you don't follow it linearly. You're going to have to go around different barriers. You're going to have to confront different challenges. And just like traveling on the highway, some days there's road construction and you're just going to have to move around it. Third, we bring you what we hope is a model that's not just filled with a protocol, but a model that's filled with art. FFT is structured, but FFT is enormously creative in how that structure gets implemented with families in an everyday practice. We're going to help you create the structure for you to find your own creativity. Because at the end of the day, we want you to practice FFT as you, not as one of us. We want you to do the model with high adherence, but we want you to be able to do the model with your own voice and in your own way. FFT is not a static model, even though it's been around a long time. FFT is an evolving model, and through each of the things that myself and Jim Alexander has written, we've tried to develop FFT and incorporate the new things that have developed and new things that have emerged into the field. So unlike some models that get fairly set in stone, FFT has been growing and developing over time. One of the features that makes FFT very unique among evidence-based treatment programs currently is the way we practice with evidence. I think everybody now knows that better evidence produces better outcomes. The question now is, what kind of evidence can we bring to bear? What kind of evidence can we put in front of you so that you can use that evidence in every single decision that you make when trying to translate a model like FFT to a complicated and unique family system? So we practice with evidence by some of the things we're going to show you later in this presentation, where we gather questionnaires from families after every single session to get their sense of progress, their sense of impact, and their sense of alliance with us. Practicing with evidence is one of the very unique things that makes FFT special. Second, FFT is a family-based intervention, so whether you're working in a conjoint family session with every member of the family, or whether you're talking individually to a youth, a caretaker, or to a young adult, the focus is on the family and how those discussions you're having impact the way in which that unit of family relationships works together. Now, in having a family focused, it's important to remember that FFT's main objective is to take an alliance-based focus with that. That means working with the family and having tremendous respect for them in regard to how they manage their daily life, while at the same time acknowledging the fact that we're important players in the change process as therapists. And third, FFT is very unique in that it matches to the context. And so FFT TCM, for example, has unique features in it because of the context in which it works. FFT, the core model, has different features because of the context in which it works. So it's important to remember that the clinical change mechanisms that make up the powerful features of FFT and that promote to good outcomes with families have to also change and adapt with context. Now, our focus and how we've been implementing and practicing FFT is very unique. and maybe unlike others. We're interested in being clinically very specific with a model. So rather than taking broad generalities and kind of common statements and applying a one-size-fits-all to everyone, from our perspective, FFT, although it is a very specific model and it already has a pre-planned approach in terms of its phases, it needs to be specifically adapted and translated to a family for it to work. Our focus is on evidence-based decision making. So we want to make sure that every time you make a decision about what to do in the next session or what to do in the current session, that you're using the most current information we can get from the family. We want to have a relevant and helpful training process that has an evidence base. So you're going to see as you go through FFT Adaptware that we'll keep track of many of the things that you're doing, that we're going to focus on how well you do and how well you answer questions so we can provide better help for you. And then fourth, it's extremely important to us, and I think everybody knows as we move through and we develop treatment models now, that it has to involve the family voice in treatment decisions. Now, when I say family voice, I don't mean that means to have a meeting at the beginning of treatment and ask the family what they'd like, but to, in a very relevant way, ask them every time we speak with them how things are going, what they think, what changes they need, and whether or not they are experiencing the impact in their daily life that we're trying to promote through our family-based sessions. So what we've done in the development of FFT is to take the research findings that are emerging yearly, community needs that they've developed, and put them into a way to look at systematic adaptations. So on the one hand, over the last 10 years, we've been focusing on a way to do evidence-based training and figuring out a way to implement and systematically put FFT into community settings. To do that, we've adjusted and adapted FFT into not only the FFT-TCM model, but we have an FFT foster care approach and an FFT behavioral health approach, each of which have a different, unique focus because of their context. And then lastly, we spent a lot of time, and we're going to focus a lot of time helping you learn how to clinically implement the FFT model. And what I mean by that is that it's easy to run through just the paint-by-the-numbers steps of engaging and motivating and reducing blame that FFT brings to the table. The real creativity happens when you, as a therapist, an interventionist, a clinician, implement that model in a way that increasingly fits the special and unique things about that family. So in a sense, we're using what's emerging in the field is called a precision behavioral health approach. We're using measurement feedback or real-time feedback from families session by session to help us make that fitting occur. So FFT's really evolved from the early days of community needs and research around helping youth to something much more systematic, all of which is organized to help produce better outcomes for families in different contexts. Let's take a few minutes to talk about what makes FFT particularly effective and why it's a model that we should be focusing our attention on. First of all, the model links skills, goals, and change mechanisms. Now, what I mean by that is that when you go into a session or begin to work on a case with a family, you will have particular treatment goals. These treatment goals are related to the stages of change that a family goes through as they begin to find out about treatment, get engaged in treatment, find it helpful, adopt new things they get from treatment, and then keep those going. So first of all, the model brings a set of goals for you that match the change process that people go through in successfully changing. Now, with those goals, we're even able to link particular therapeutic skills so that you know which skill to use that has the highest likelihood of producing that particular goal. Both of those, the skills and the goals, relate to the evidence-based change mechanisms that the long-standing psychotherapy research suggests will help families produce positive outcomes. FFT is effective because clients have a voice. We ask them all the time. The asking of clients about how they're doing, the alliance they have with us, and how much progress they're making every session not only gives us information, but it also is an engagement tool. It's a way to say to families that we value your voice and your voice is important. at every step of the way, whether it's with your agency, whether it's with a community stakeholder, whether it's with a family. FFT is effective because of its collaborative and alliance-based approach. That means with other service providers, we're always working and reaching out and integrating what we do, because it is the family that's at the center of the treatment system. And it's the family that needs to be benefited. And we need to be the people that take the extra effort to help overcome the differences between service providers. FFT is also effective because we have continuous quality improvement data that fits into our fidelity management, our evidence-based supervision model, our training, and the way in which we monitor cases to make sure that they're effective. So we bring a model that has a lens and has goals and skills. We ask the client to join us and have a strong voice in the treatment. We implement collaboratively with others as two experts, us meaning you and the treatment model being experts in the change process, and families being experts in their life value and what's important to them. And the community stakeholders being experts in terms of helping the family fit into the context in which they work. And it's when it's us working in alliance and collaboration that connects those pieces. And then data. Data that makes FFT not an evidence-based model, but an evidence-based model that gets practiced with evidence in every session. Let's begin by talking about teens in foster care, because this is where this model really begins to separate itself from others. First, unlike small children, teens in foster care really provide a unique challenge to the child welfare system. That's in part because they're not just often in the child welfare system. They can also be involved in juvenile justice, mental health, and different parts of the educational system. They often exhibit in those involvements externalizing behavior problems that make it very, very difficult to work together with them. Conduct problems, drug use, school failure. And each of these activities has a major impact on their ability to remain in their own family. It has an impact on their successful adjustment to foster care placement and even in their ability to remain in a community setting. Now, unfortunately, despite this huge challenge, there are no systematic family-based treatment programs available to communities that are specifically tailored to the unique context and the unique challenges of adolescents in foster care. Now, I don't know if you know, but currently there's about 34% of the foster children in the United States are teens. And that's a very large group. And actually, the foster care system was developed to provide, not to really support teens in a long-term way. It was developed to provide temporary care for vulnerable, very young children. So it's not surprising to recognize that today, when over a third of the children in the system are actually teens, that the system may be struggling with learning how and adjusting and adapting to that different clientele. Unfortunately, the growth in the number of teens in care did not result in a corresponding growth in services that are specialized to meet their needs. To further complicate things, teens in foster care are actually a heterogeneous group. They're not just all the same, and they're difficult to get a handle on to understand. Some were in foster care as younger children, and then reunified with their families, only to return to care again as teens. This return is often because teens' challenging behavior and the inability of families to effectively help them navigate these challenges gets in the way. Some of these teens are also entered into foster care as young children. They grew up in foster care. Most of these teens have experienced multiple placements with corresponding losses at each placement in schools, friends, and supports. While they may have come to care in their family and in their friends, into care because of their family and friends, they still have to leave them with each placement. Now, they may have come into the foster care system because of abuse or neglect, but they often remain in care because the succession of caregivers has been unable to meet their needs or successfully respond to the behavioral challenges that they may show. You know, the last group of teens is a group of teens that have grown up in foster care. And they enter the foster care system a little bit later then. Usually has in their first time as teens. Some as old as 16 and 17 years old. The majority of them are entering due to escalating behavioral challenges that their families really can't satisfy. Due to these really difficult scenarios, it's often difficult for teens, regardless of what the system does, to achieve permanency or the permanent connection with a family. In fact, if you look at the data, teens achieve permanency at much lower rates than do younger children. When teens fail to achieve permanency, they're at risk of aging out of the system. That then becomes a pathway of heightened risk even further, heightened risk for things like homelessness, poverty, early pregnancy, and involvement in a host of adult systems such as the mental health system, substance abuse, and the criminal justice system. They're also at a very high risk of becoming the next generations of parents involved in the child welfare system. In fact, national research on foster care alumni has found that almost 70% of the young adults who aged out of the foster care system actually attempted to reunify with their birth families. These attempts are often not successful, not because of a lack of desire, but because as young adults, these folks attempted to reunite in an emotionally charged and difficult setting without the relationship skills that they need to repair significantly fractured relationships that have stressed them and others in this family for generations. Now, functional family therapy foster care is designed to meet some of these very, very unique needs. It's relationally focused, trauma-informed. It's a treatment pathway to promote the increased likelihood of positive adjustment in all areas, in school and in behavior, in a foster care placement, and ultimately in permanency. The model is really intended to be, as you're going to see, comprehensive and systematic as an approach to helping kids overcome what we think are the really, and what the data is beginning to show, are the important individual and relational trauma events that continue to act out within the relational patterns between them and their family. The model intends to use the evidence-based and relationally focused techniques of FFT to engage, develop a family focus to treatment, and help families unify for successful permanency placement. We have some very specific targeted outcomes for the program. First of all, we want to see reductions in youth behavior problems, improvements in school behavior, and stabilization of a school placement, improved family functioning, and even more so, improved ability for families, meaning both the foster care placement families and permanency families, to not just function well, but be empowered to learn to solve problems together as they come up in the future. We think it is through those mechanisms that these families, both the foster care family in the short term and the permanency family in the long term, can build important and critical protective factors that will help wrap around the youth as they sort through and as they come to terms with the difficult things they've been through. At the end of the day, we think that will reduce out-of-home placements and also help the individual youth by reducing the trauma symptoms both individually and within family functioning. Now, one of the things that's very unique about FFT foster care is it brings unique attention to 4 areas. First, to the context. We know from our background research that one of the things that happens in foster care placements is there are a lot of people involved. So we need a systematic intervention and something that helps coordinate care. Second, to do this in a comprehensive way, we need a broader definition of family. And in our particular view, it is not just the youth, it's not just the foster care, foster placement, and not just the permanency placement. It is all of those and the caseworkers that we will define as family. Number 3, our focus is on steps to permanency. We're going to take and we're going to assume for the beginning that there was a permanency possibility, even if we don't quite know what it is yet. And the whole goal is to move that youth either through adoption and through long-term placement in foster care or through the emergence of a caregiver from extended family or another adoption situation. We're going to move them to permanency. And last, all the way along the way, we're going to take a trauma focus to understanding both how youth work, how to understand their behavior, and how to integrate those behaviors into family systems. And more importantly, what it takes for both caregivers and youth to work together in a family-focused way to overcome the triggers and the other parts of what goes on in trauma. Now, the model is a very comprehensive one. You can see we begin from referral through placement to permanency. We actually begin with an assessment and treatment planning phase in which care is coordinated, in which early baseline assessments are done on the youth, where school contacts are identified, where specific clinical needs of the youth are identified. In addition, one of the goals of this phase is treatment coordination, where we try to identify who's involved in the case to make sure there's a comprehensive and systematic and common voice to the treatment that the youth, foster parent, and others are getting. Now, as foster care placement begins, the model looks to you, the foster care interventionist, to engage in a series of engagement motivation, conjoint family sessions with the foster parents and the youth. Now, that may mean that you'll have separate, or it could even be combined meetings between the youth and the potentially permanency parents. But in both particular cases, this is 1 to 2 to 3 conjoint sessions where the focus is on the reduction of negativity, the creation of a family focus, and the development of a collaborative agreement between the foster youth and the foster family about the nature of their relationship. As those sessions continue, the next part of the model is a stabilization phase, where the interventionist backs away, where the foster care placement becomes the primary treatment, and where the FFT foster care interventionist helps the foster family and the youth work together to learn how to use pro-social skills in order to create stable relationships. We think it's within those stable relationships that the relational trauma that the youth carries with them helps to be overcome and helps to be healed. The role of the FFT foster care interventionist at that phase is to play a monitoring and problem-solving role. You're going to see in a bit that we're going to use technology to help develop early warning systems of when youth are not doing well in school and in foster placement. And you're going to see that we're going to use those same early warning tools through technology to keep track on how well the youth and the foster parent are working together each day, each week. The primary core change mechanism in the stabilization phase is the foster family placement. So with the training that these therapeutic foster parents will get and with the support that they get from you, they provide the ongoing daily stable relationships where youth learn to work through the trauma that they've experienced. As placement moves along and a permanency opportunity develops, either through the initial plan or along the way, the FFT interventionist takes on yet a new role. Here, through conjoint family sessions in 3 distinct phases, the interventionist will help the youth and the permanency family develop a relational focus to coming together and unifying, to helping them develop tools to work things out, and finally, helping them generalize and maintain those changes so that they can keep them over time. The entire model is also based on an ongoing clinical feedback or measurement feedback system. The FFT clinical feedback system, or our Care For system, will be the foundation of managing information, managing clinical change measures, doing evidence-based treatment, and learning and using baseline and discharge measures to determine the level of change. So it will be core and central to each part of the system. We'll talk about this as we go along a bit further in this discussion. This is the FFT foster care program, starting with assessment and treatment planning, specifically focusing on engagement and motivation, helping stabilize placements, and then systematically focusing on reunification and successful permanency.